The front door was already open when I arrived. Not open the way a home is open when someone is expecting you, warm light spilling out, the sound of a voice calling your name from somewhere inside. Open the way a hotel lobby is open. Functionally, indifferently. I stood on the stone steps for a moment longer than I needed to. The house was new. My father had finished building it 8 months ago, and I had seen photographs online the way you see photographs of a stranger's life scrolling past them without meaning to. Stopping anyway. It was large. 3 stories, limestone facade, a wraparound terrace on the 2nd floor. I had looked at those photographs for longer than I wanted to admit, and not because I was impressed. I was looking at the cantilever. The extended terrace on the 2nd floor jutted out further than anything the surrounding soil composition should have supported without specific reinforcement. I had made a note of it in my head and then put it away, the way you put away things that are not your problem. I told myself it was not my problem. I went inside. My father's new house smelled like cedar and catered food, and the particular cologne of men who have recently made money and want rooms to know about it. There were maybe 60 people already there, more arriving behind me. My father had turned 60 that week, and this party was the kind of party that was less about celebrating him and more about reminding everyone in a 40-mile radius that he had done well. I found him near the fireplace, glass in hand, laughing at something a man in a gray suit had said. He looked good. Older, but good. He had the easy posture of someone who had not spent the last decade worrying about much. He saw me, and his expression did something complicated. Maya. He said my name the way you say the name of an appointment you forgot you had scheduled. Happy birthday, I said. He hugged me the way people hug when a camera might be watching. One arm, brief, a pat on the back. Then he held me at arm's length and looked at me like I was a car he used to own. You look tired, he said. Long drive. You should have flown. I didn't say anything to that. He turned slightly to include the man in the gray suit, who was watching us with the polite attention of someone waiting for context. My father put a hand briefly on my shoulder. This is my daughter, he said. Maya. She works for the government. He said it the way you'd say she collects ceramic owls as a piece of information that explains something small and harmless about a person. Some kind of inspection work. Bridges, I think. Structural engineering, I said. Army Corps of Engineers. The man in the gray suit nodded the nod of someone who has already moved on. My father smiled at me with his mouth. Get yourself a drink. Your brother's around somewhere. He turned back to the gray suit and I was released. I got a glass of water and found a corner near the back of the main room where I could stand without being in anyone's way. My half-brother found me 20 minutes later. He was 24, wore a blazer that cost more than my monthly car payment, and had recently been made vice president of our father's development company, a title that had been created specifically for him. Maya. He said it like a greeting and a mild disappointment simultaneously. Hey, Dad said you drove up. I did. He looked around the room with the proprietary ease of someone who had grown up in this kind of space. I had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Dayton with my mother, doing homework on the kitchen table, eating cereal for dinner on the night she worked double shifts. My half-brother had grown up here, or in places like here. We were technically family in the way that a map and a territory are technically the same thing. What do you actually do? He asked, not rudely, genuinely. He had asked me this before, at the last family event I had attended 4 years ago, and had forgotten the answer. Structural safety engineering, I said. I assess infrastructure for the federal government. Bridges, dams, federal buildings, military facilities. I also consult on construction projects that involve federal contracts. He nodded slowly, so like, you check if things are built right. Essentially, yes. Dad could have used someone like that, he said. He was smiling. Could have saved some money on contractors. I don't do residential. Right. He looked past me at someone across the room who was more interesting. Well, good to see you. He drifted away, and I was alone again. I stood there with my water, and I did the thing I always did in new buildings. I looked up. I looked at the ceiling joints. I looked at where the walls met the floor. I listened, underneath the noise of 60 people and a catering company, for the sounds buildings make when something is not right. Buildings talk, if you know the frequency. A groan where there should be silence. A flex where there should be rigidity. Most people can't hear it. I have spent 11 years training myself to hear nothing else. I heard something. It was faint. Under the music and the laughter and the clink of glasses, there was a sound from the second floor that I felt more than heard. A low, periodic stress sound, the kind a joint makes when it is carrying more load than it was designed for, and has been doing so long enough to begin to say so. I set my water glass down on a side table. I went upstairs. The second floor was less crowded, mostly a wide hallway that opened onto the wraparound terrace through a set of double glass doors. The terrace was lit with string lights and had maybe 15 people on it, clustered in small groups, drinks in hand, looking out over my father's lawn. I walked to the glass doors and stopped. I was not looking at the people. I was looking at the connection point where the terrace met the exterior wall, at the seam. At the way the string lights were hung from anchor points, I could see were set into the fascia board rather than into structural members. I walked out onto the terrace slowly, moving close to the wall, distributing my weight carefully. I crouched down near the corner and looked at the edge of the deck structure where it met the house. In the gap between the decking boards, in the shadow, I could see the bracket assembly. The brackets were undersized for the span. I am not a person who panics. Panic is a luxury you do not get to have in my line of work. When you are on a bridge catwalk 400 feet above a river and the instruments are telling you something bad, panic does not help the bridge. You assess, you calculate, you move. I assessed. The terrace had been built with the kind of hardware you use when you want something to look structurally sound rather than be structurally sound. The brackets connecting the joist hangers to the ledger board were half-inch, when they should have been 3/4 inch minimum for this span and load. And tonight, with 15 people standing on it, music vibrating through the exterior walls, and the temperature differential between inside and outside, creating additional thermal stress on the connection points. I calculated. I had maybe 20 minutes before the connection points began to fail. Possibly less, if anyone brought more people out here, if someone turned the music up, if the group shifted toward the far end of the terrace away from the house. I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, to the nearest cluster of people. They looked at me. I use the voice I use when I am on a job site and I need people to do something without asking me why. Not loud, just certain. I need everyone to move inside, please. Right now. Please move through the doors. One woman laughed a little, confused. Is something inside, please? I was already moving them gently, using my body to redirect the group toward the doors, the way you move water by placing your hand in it. Go ahead inside, please. Thank you. I got 3 groups moving before the 4th one pushed back. A man in a red tie looked at me with the expression men sometimes give me when I tell them something structural is wrong and they have not yet decided whether to believe me. "What's going on?" he asked. "There's a safety concern with the terrace. I need everyone inside." "What kind of safety concern?" I looked at him evenly, the kind that requires everyone to be inside. "Please," something in my face or my voice settled the question. He went inside. His group followed him. I got the last 2 people moving and was the last one through the doors. I pulled them close behind me and stood in front of them. A woman nearby was looking at me. "Should we be worried?" "You should be inside," I said. "Which you are. So no." I took out my phone. I called the non-emergency line for the county building department, identified myself, gave my federal employee credentials, and described what I had found. I was calm and specific. I used precise language bracket gauge, joist span, estimated load capacity deficit, visible hardware failure indicators. The person on the other end put me on hold twice before I was transferred to someone who understood what I was saying. I was on the phone for 4 minutes. By the time I hung up, a small crowd had gathered near me in the hallway, sensing that something was happening without knowing what. My father was at the edge of the crowd. He looked at me across the people between us with an expression I recognized. It was the expression he had worn when I was 12 and had corrected his contractor about the load capacity of a floor system, having read about it in a library book. He had laughed then. He was not laughing now. "Maya," his voice was controlled, "what is going on?" "Your terrace has insufficient bracket hardware for its span and live load," I said. "It needs to be cleared until a licensed structural engineer can assess and repair the connection points. I've already called the county. An inspector is on their way." The room was quiet in the particular way. Rooms get quiet when something has shifted. "It's fine," my father said. His jaw was tight. "It passed inspection. The inspection record will show whether the hardware was correctly specified," I said. "I'd want to see the permit drawings and the sign-off documentation before I agreed with that. But tonight is not the night for that conversation." Tonight the terrace stays closed. He looked at me for a long moment. This is my house, he said. I know. You come here, you don't call for months, and the first thing you do is… The first thing I did was say happy birthday. I kept my voice level. The second thing I did was keep 60 people from standing on a structure that is going to fail. I watched him decide something. He turned away from me and began moving through the room, laughing, reassuring guests, performing the party back into existence. My half-brother appeared at my elbow. You couldn't just let it go? He said, low and tight. No. You don't even know if it's actually… I know. He looked at me with something between frustration and something else I didn't have a name for. Then he walked away. I went back downstairs, found my original corner, and picked up my water glass. My hands were steady. They are always steady. My mother used to say I came into the world with the same expression I had crossing a bridge, catwalk focused, a little removed, already looking at the joints. The party redistributed itself on the first floor and the outdoor lawn. I stood in my corner and watched it happen. I was not particularly interested in being thanked. I was not particularly interested in being spoken to. I had come here because my mother had asked me to try one more time. She had said, "You only get one father, Maya, even if he doesn't deserve the title." She had said it gently. She was a gentle person. I had driven 4 hours because she was a gentle person and I loved her. I was thinking about leaving. I was working out the logistics of leaving quietly, retrieving my jacket from the coat closet near the front door, finding my keys, saying something brief to whoever intercepted me on the way out when I heard my name. Not from someone near me, from across the room. I looked up. There was a man standing at the edge of the main room, by the entrance hallway, still in his coat. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the particular posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where posture mattered. He was looking at me with an expression of recognition so clear it was almost startling. I recognized him too, a half-second later. Brigadier General Alan Mercer, U.S. Army, retired 6 months ago after 31 years of service. I had briefed him twice, in person, at the Corps of Engineers district office in Louisville. I had also written a third of the technical documentation that had been used to justify the repair budget for 7 federal infrastructure sites that fell under his command oversight during his last posting. He had read every page. I knew this because he had called me, once, at 7 in the morning, to ask a follow-up question about a load transfer calculation on page 42. He crossed the room. The people between us moved without quite knowing why, the way people move for certain presences. He stopped in front of me and put out his hand. "Maya Chen," he said. "General Mercer." I shook his hand. "I didn't know you'd be here. Your father and I have been in some conversations about a federal contract on a project downtown," he said. He extended an invitation. He glanced in the direction of the terrace upstairs, then back at me. "I heard there was an incident upstairs." "A precautionary closure," I said. "Hardware deficiency on the terrace bracket assembly. Inspector is on the way." He looked at me for a moment with the expression he had in briefings, fully present, assembling information. "You caught it tonight? At a party?" I noticed it when I arrived, confirmed it when I went up. Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't surprise exactly, more like confirmation of something he had already believed. "You want to know what I remember about you?" he said. I didn't answer. I was aware, without looking, that the room had gotten quieter around us, that my father was somewhere nearby, that my half-brother was somewhere to my left. I remember that you told me, in writing, in a report that I did not fully appreciate at the time, that the I-64 connector bridge in our district had stress fracture indicators in the south expansion joints that warranted immediate closure and full inspection. He said it clearly, in the unhurried voice of someone making a record. I remember that I asked you to wait while we reviewed the budget timeline, and I remember that 3 weeks later, during a routine maintenance inspection, we found exactly what you said we would find. He paused. Closing that bridge for emergency repair cost us $4 million and 6 months of traffic rerouting. Not closing it when you told us to would have cost significantly more. He looked at me steadily. In every sense of that phrase. The room was quiet now. Not performatively quiet, actually quiet, the way rooms get when something real is happening. "You were right," he said. "You were right, and I was slow, and I have thought about that report more than once since I retired." He looked down at my hand, still extended from the handshake. And then, with a deliberateness that was entirely intentional, He held it for a moment, not shaking it again, just holding it and said, "Loud enough for the room? The work you do matters. I want to make sure you know I know that." He released my hand. I am not a person who cries in rooms. I did not cry, but something happened in my chest that required a moment. "Thank you, sir," I said. He nodded once. The kind of nod that is also a period. I looked up. My father was 6 feet away. I had not heard him move there. He was standing with his glass at his side, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen on him before. It was not anger. It was not pride. It was something in between the particular stillness of a person who has been handed information they cannot process in real time. His mouth was slightly open. He was looking at me the way you look at something you thought you knew and have just discovered you didn't. He didn't speak. I aimed it. There were things I could have said. I had been storing them for years in the quiet part of myself where I kept things I did not let myself say about the apartment in Dayton, about the library books, about the Christmas when I was 15, and he forgot to call, about every time he had introduced me as my daughter. She does something with buildings, while my half-brother's title was announced like a weather event. I had a catalog. I had kept it organized. I didn't say any of it, not because I forgave him, not because the evening had made me generous toward him, but because I have learned, over 11 years of standing on structures that could fail, that some things do not need your words to collapse. Some things just need time and the right load. He had 60 people in this room who had just heard a Brigadier General speak about my work the way my father had never once spoken about my work in 30 years. That was already in the room. It did not need my help. I turned to General Mercer. "It was good to see you, sir." "You as well," he said. "Tell your team I said so." I picked up my jacket from the chair where I had set it when I came back downstairs. I found my keys in my coat pocket. I walked to the front door, which was still open, still functional and indifferent, still letting the cold October air move through it in both directions. My half-brother was near the door. He was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on him before either. "Maya," he said. I stopped. He looked like he was going to say something and then couldn't find where it was. He opened his mouth once and then closed it. "Drive safe," he said finally. It was not an apology, but it was the closest thing to one I had heard from anyone in that house in a long time, and I recognized it for what it was. A person on the edge of understanding something, not quite there yet, reaching. "I will," I said. I walked out. The night air was cold and clean and tasted like October in Ohio, dead leaves and distant rain, and the particular sharpness of a sky that has been recently cleared. I walked down the stone steps to the driveway without hurrying. My car was parked at the far end, under a row of Bradford pear trees that were losing their leaves in the wind. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. I thought about my mother, who had asked me to try one more time. I would call her when I got home. I would tell her I tried. I would tell her I was glad I went, which was true, though not for the reasons she had hoped. I thought about the terrace. The county inspector would arrive, probably within the hour, and would confirm what I had found, and my father's contractor would spend an unpleasant few days explaining the hardware specifications to someone who was paid to care about them. The terrace would be repaired correctly, or it would be closed. Either outcome was fine with me. Both outcomes meant 60 people had gone home tonight instead of the alternative. I thought about the moment General Mercer had held my hand and said, "The work you do matters," in a room where my father was standing 6 feet away. I had not planned that. I had not needed that. I had cleared that terrace because a terrace with failing brackets needs to be cleared. Not because I wanted anyone to see me do it. Not because I was performing competence for an audience. Not because I had spent 15 years waiting for a room to finally understand what I was worth. But I am human, and it had mattered anyway. It had mattered in the way that true things matter when they are finally said out loud, not because they are new, but because for one moment, in one room, there was no space left for the lie that had been living there instead. My father had called me. "She works for the government, inspects bridges or something in front of 60 people, and a man who had read 42 pages of my technical documentation and called me at 7 in the morning to ask a follow-up question." I started the car. The drive home was 4 hours through dark Ohio highway, past bridges I had personally inspected, past an interchange I had flagged for deferred maintenance 3 years ago that was still on a waiting list somewhere, past the ordinary and enormous infrastructure of a country that required people to understand load and stress and failure points. People who would do that work, whether or not any room ever went quiet to acknowledge it. I drove with the radio off. Around the second hour, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced at it at a stoplight. It was a text from a number I had not saved but recognized. My half-brother. Dad wants to know if you can come for Thanksgiving. I stared at it for a long moment. The light changed. I put the phone face down and drove. I thought about what my mother had said. You only get one father. She was right. I did only get one. I had gotten this one, a man who built beautiful things and did not always understand what made them hold. A man who had 600 square feet of terrace and had bought the cheaper brackets. A man who had a daughter with 11 years of federal structural engineering experience and had introduced her as she checks things for the government. He was not going to become a different person because a Brigadier General had said my name in his living room. People do not change the way buildings change quietly, under load, along lines of structural necessity. People change slowly, incompletely, or not at all, and they require something I did not always have enough of to give him. But I was still his daughter. That was a fact of engineering too. In its way, a load I had been carrying long enough that it had become part of my structure rather than something placed on top of it. You cannot always remove the load. Sometimes you can only reinforce the joint. I would think about Thanksgiving. I would call my mother when I got home. I would make tea and sit at my own kitchen table, in my own apartment, and I would tell her what had happened. Not the part about the general. Maybe, or maybe yes, the part about the general, because she would want to know that someone had said it out loud in a room. I would tell her I was okay. I would tell her I was more than okay. I drove through the dark. Somewhere behind me, my father's house stood on its limestone foundation, its second-floor terrace closed and waiting for an inspector, its lights still on, its party continuing in a slightly different shape than it had begun. Somewhere in that house, a man who had built things his whole life was holding his glass and standing in the rearranged silence of a room where something had happened that he didn't have words for yet. I hoped, quietly and without drama, that he would find the words eventually. I hoped it the way you hope for a structure you have documented and released, with professional detachment, with genuine care underneath it, with the knowledge that some things hold and some things don't, and that the honest work is in telling the difference. The highway stretched out ahead of me, straight and dark and steady. I drove,